May 1940. Cameras roll as the German army storms across France, filming the front lines of a conflict fought with a ferocity and speed never before witnessed in the theater of war. Ruthless aerial onslaughts, remorseless tank attacks, and seemingly inexhaustible stormtroopers push hundreds of thousands of British and French troops to the brink of annihilation on the beaches of Dunkirk. This is Blitzkrieg, lightning war, as you've never seen it before. Now, rare, newly colorized footage will take us to the heart of the action and reveal just how close the Germans came to winning the war and stamping Nazi rule across the planet. Summer, 1937. Edwin Graf Rothkirch and his 13-year-old son Leopold enjoy the international exhibition in Paris. The event is dominated by the Soviet and German pavilions. The Senegalese people in the French colonial section catch Rothkirch's eye. Father and son enjoy their vacation. In 3 years, Rothkirch will return to Paris under very different circumstances. As an avid amateur movie maker, Major General Rothkirch films every aspect of his life, like an SS cavalry parade through Munich. The swastikas signal the tightening grip the Nazis have on Germany. By the end of the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's popularity in Germany is at an all-time high. In Berlin, tens of thousands crowd around the city's cathedral to hear him speak. Hitler makes no secret of his desire to expand the German Empire, to provide Lebensraum, greater living space, for his people. The crowds back his ambition. In March 1939, German forces sweep across Czechoslovakia. The jubilant Führer takes a victory lap through the capital, Prague. The Western superpowers of Britain and France don't respond. So Hitler sets his sights on Poland. The start of the German invasion of Poland is marked by Panzer Mark 111s rolling across the border. They are filmed by special military-trained camera units.
The idea of embedding German film crews with frontline soldiers in the Wehrmacht was the brainchild of the Minister of Propaganda for the Third Reich, Joseph Goebbels. He believed in the program of manipulating societies through propaganda in order to further the German war effort.
Goebbels' carefully curated newsreels are shown weekly in every German cinema. They glorify Hitler and celebrate the German military. Goebbels orders German planes to be equipped with the latest cameras. Propaganda films celebrate the screaming near vertical bomb runs of Junker 87 Stuka dive bombers.
By filming and documenting the Wehrmacht as it advanced across enemy soil, in particular by showing tanks advancing down enemy roads and contrasting that with defeated and fleeing civilians, it helped advance the mythos of an unstoppable German army that swept all before it. It was the perfect way to showcase this new, bigger, faster, and stronger, revitalized German army.
Poland quickly falls to the Nazis. In Warsaw, Hitler brazenly celebrates with yet another victory parade. But this time, his belief the Western powers won't intervene is wrong. After a hastily convened war cabinet, Britain and France declare war on Germany.
Hitler is shocked after the invasion of Poland when the Allies declare war. He's provoked them over and over again, and they haven't reacted. He turns to an aide at the time and supposedly says, "What now?" Now, we think this story may be apocryphal, but there seems to be a real sense of surprise on Hitler's part that the Allies have finally declared war.
In Paris, French newsreels show off their own military might, parading under the Arc de Triomphe, a symbol of past glories. With over 2.5 million troops, backed with fast and maneuverable tanks, like the Hotchkiss H-39, France boasts the most powerful army on the planet. Not only do the French have military superiority, they also have a formidable defensive system, the heavily fortified Maginot Line. Stretching along 280 miles of the French-German border, the Maginot Line is a state-of-the-art network of thick concrete bunkers, armed with guns, mortar, and anti-tank emplacements. With war looming, French newsreels reassure the public that the architects of the Maginot Line have planned everything to the last detail, even to its restaurant standard kitchens and underground church. The Germans also see the newsreels. To try and even up the military balance with the French, the Wehrmacht goes into recruitment overdrive. 51-year-old World War I veteran Edwin Graf Rotkirch is called into active duty. A show jumper in the 1932 Olympics, Rotkirch trains rookies in the mounted 9th Reserve Company. A river crossing has a steep learning curve. War horses may seem like a throwback to a previous era, but the German military relies heavily on them and will use almost 3 million over the course of the war. With tensions rising and the Allies aware a German attack could come at any time, 150,000 troops of the British Expeditionary Force arrive in Belgium to bolster French defenses.
Allied preparations for the German invasion of the West very much included their thinking that there would be a rerun of the 1914 plan, an attack through central Belgium, this time a mechanized version. By putting their first-class mobile troops in central Belgium, there was a belief that they could be moved forward to stop the German advance, draw the Germans into an attritional battle they couldn't win.
Initially, the German plan is to once again invade France through Belgium. But a staff officer, Erich von Manstein, is frustrated by the lack of tactical innovation shown by Hitler's general staff.
I found it humiliating that our generation could do nothing better than repeat an old recipe.
Manstein is not afraid to speak his mind.
Manstein's plan demanded that the Germans used radical military thought, particularly the modern use of tank forces. The aim was to deal the enemy a psychological blow using the most modern techniques that would see the Allies crumple and wilt before their eyes. Hitler was delighted with the plan that Manstein gave him. It was not only a radical plan using radical methods, It will give the Germans the opportunity to win a huge strategic success in days and weeks rather than months and years.
Manstein's plan is for Army Group B to attack the Netherlands and Belgium. But this is a feint. While the Allies are engaged in the north, Army Group A will sweep into France just above the Maginot Line through the dense Ardennes woods. Then head north to launch a sneak attack and destroy the Allied armies from behind.
The German High Command had a huge amount of skepticism regarding Manstein's plan. It required funneling large numbers of German tanks through the densely wooded Ardennes forest. If anything were to go wrong, it would strand thousands of vehicles and tanks in place. This would make them sitting ducks for the Allied air forces if they were to be spotted and discovered.
But Manstein trusts the power of his war machines. He promises Hitler his mechanized forces will deliver a quick and decisive victory in France, and the complete annihilation of their enemies. In the spring of 1940, the French are confident they are ready to deal with anything the Germans throw at them. A rarely seen documentary by French filmmaker Henri Lepage gives a morale-boosting insight into the French army's readiness for war. The troops enjoy sporting events, live music, and movie nights. There's even dancing in the streets. It's all very lighthearted. But Lepage shows almost nothing of the troops training for war. France's allies show far more concern. On May 10, 1940, Winston Churchill becomes Britain's Prime Minister. He counters Hitler's aggression with his own impassioned declaration.
You ask what is our policy? I will say it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might, against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime.
The same day, the Germans launched their invasion of France. Army Group B begins its offensive in the north. Cameras roll as Luftwaffe Dornier 17 pilots release their deadly payload on air bases across the Netherlands and Belgium. With the threat of Allied airborne retaliation removed, elite paratroopers of 7th Air Division drop onto key defensive sites in Belgium. They're carrying new ultra-destructive hollow-tipped explosives. The shaped charges focus the weapon's blast to destroy even the most fortified positions. In response, the unsuspecting British Expeditionary Force directs its units towards Belgium. French camera crews film the smiling troops as they rush headlong into the trap laid by the Germans. With the Allies engaged in the north, German Army Group A makes its move into France. Manstein's plan is running like clockwork. Until French reconnaissance pilots report a 100-mile traffic jam of German armed vehicles heading towards the Ardennes. Packing so many panzers onto one road has brought Army Group A to a grinding standstill. The jig could be up. Stationary German tank commanders wait for the Allies to strike.
Again and again, I cast a worried look up at the bright blue sky. My division now presents an ideal attack target.
An Allied airstrike on the stationary tanks, and World War II could be over. But the airstrike never happens.
The Allies don't bombard the Germans in the Ardennes forest for a simple reason. They don't expect them to be there. It's the whole point of the German plan. No one would line up all your tanks on a single column on a single road and drive them into the Ardennes. It's the very element of surprise the Germans are counting on.
The tank gridlock is finally broken by a German officer coordinating the traffic from the air. France's military leaders remain convinced the Maginot Line will stop any German advance in the south. But by traveling just 12 miles west of where the line ends, Army Group A avoids the barricade altogether. Despite the failure of the Maginot Line to stop the German advance, the French generals still aren't worried. The Ardennes' 4,000 square miles of rough terrain and dense deciduous forest should be impassable to the Nazis' large, heavy panzers. But as the Germans press on, camera crews embedded with the 8th Panzer Regiment show tank commanders examining reconnaissance maps that show the Ardennes isn't quite as impenetrable as the French hope. Following carefully planned routes, the 8th Division's Panzer Mark IIs break off from the main road. The drivers expertly negotiate the twisting, turning forest paths.
The French High Command was driven by hope rather than reality, and they believed that the Ardennes were impassable, but the Germans had done their homework. Radio assets were used to very great effect, and together with a great plan and also very bold leadership, it allowed them to pass armoured vehicles through the Ardennes with great speed, far more quickly than anybody had ever expected.
In just a matter of hours, the panzers are through the woods. With the panzers now in the open, Tank Commander General Heinz Guderian orders his units to operate as fast-moving spearheads. His motorized divisions cover an astonishing 100 miles in a day. German troops, following behind the tanks, show extraordinary levels of endurance. Some haven't slept for 3 days. A feat made possible by the use of a stimulant known as Pervitin, an early version of crystal meth. Pervitin can numb fear and keep a person alert for days on end. Between April and July of 1940, more than 35 million Pervitin tablets are shipped to the German military.
Often there is euphoria, an intensification of performance, a pronounced alertness. I worked through the day and my depression lifted.
Stimulants provided an opportunity to make the man into a Superman, to continue his fighting actions far beyond that the enemy could ever perceive.
Heinz Guderian and his Panzer Corps arrive at the town of Sedan on the banks of the River Meuse, just inside the French border. The French thought it would take 10 days to get there. The Germans do it in 3. Standing in the path of the German Blitzkrieg into France is the French Second Army at Sedan, 16,000 troops housed in concrete blockhouses. Expecting a World War I style engagement, they dig in, ready to repel any frontal assault. Guderian has other ideas. He calls in the Luftwaffe. For the next 8 hours, 12 squadrons of Stuka dive bombers fly more than 1,000 sorties over the French soldiers entrenched in Sedan. It's the most intense aerial bombardment the Luftwaffe will deliver in the entire war. German propaganda crews braved the aerial onslaught, to film sappers as they build pontoon bridges across the Meuse. Few bunkers are hit, and there are just 56 casualties. But the bombing exceeds even the horror of the gas attacks in the First World War. The French soldiers are psychologically devastated.
The attack was far worse than my imagination could have invented. The explosions were so frequent, you could not distinguish between individual bomb blasts. I was deaf and could hardly breathe. I made myself as small as possible, my world shaking. I sobbed.
The German air attack not only fractured the French defenses, it also fractured the French psychologically. Once the Germans had crossed the Meuse, the French were in no position to offer any resistance.
Major Wilhelm Emmerling, serving with the anti-tank battery 188, films the bomb-blasted ruins of Sedan. Empty pillboxes stand silent. Destroyed French tanks litter the roadside. And POWs from the French Second Army stare glassy-eyed at the camera. While Wilhelm Emmerling and his crew sit back and play cards. Guderian commands his mechanized units to continue the Blitzkrieg towards the unwary Allied armies in the north. The jaws of Manstein's pincer movement draw closer together. Trapped in the Germans' grip are 12 divisions of the British Expeditionary Force, 28 French divisions, and almost the entire Belgian army, totaling over 1 million men.
Guderian, who was really at the spearhead of this advance, really recognized an opportunity to capture the entire Allied army. If Britain and France lost that many soldiers, they wouldn't be able to recover from that, and that would effectively end the war.
Realizing the precarious state of the Allied forces, Churchill asks his generals to prepare for a worst-case scenario.
Churchill, for the first time, has to confront the possibility that he'll have to withdraw British manpower from the continent in order to preserve British fighting strength. This means abandoning his ally, the French, in their most urgent and dire time of need.
Footage shot by a crewman shows the 1st Panzer Division heading north towards the Allies trapped on the French coast. After his success in the south, Tank Commander Heinz Guderian is in a relaxed mood. It seems like nothing can stop his panzers. Tank commanders sit drinking champagne, while their crews smoke celebratory cigars, all confident the enemy is at their mercy and a famous victory will soon be theirs. But their leaders aren't so sure.
Hitler, having sanctioned a radical military plan, just at the point when it was about to be successful, got the jitters. His fear was that the tanks had rolled too far forward from the following infantry, and that left his troops open to the potential for a counterattack from the French interior, and the jittery Führer loses his nerve.
Luftwaffe commander Hermann Goering has Hitler's confidence, and Goering wants the glory. He reassures the Führer his air force can destroy the enemy on its own. The German High Command orders its rampaging tank units to halt. Footage from the 8th Panzer Corps show their tanks and their crews sitting idle. Some units appropriate furniture, food and wine from French locals and take the chance to relax. Others used the delay to wash away the grime of 2 weeks of unremitting warfare. But some tank officers aren't happy.
So Guderian and other corps and divisional commanders were absolutely furious and gobsmacked that right on the cusp of this glorious, unimaginable operational victory that had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, victory was being taken away from them at the last instance.
What is this order to stop the panzer formations? Do we want to build golden bridges for the English, whose army is being squeezed in? It is sheer nonsense.
The British Admiralty is frantically planning an evacuation across the Channel. They choose the northernmost town in France, Dunkirk. It's an industrial port, flanked by wide sandy beaches, with long moles that jut out into the sea. French news crews record a steady stream of Allied soldiers retreating to Dunkirk by any means possible. Train, horse, motorcycle. Expecting the Germans to easily block the evacuation and with few ships in the vicinity, the British secretly fear they'll rescue just 40,000 troops from Dunkirk, less than a tenth of the number trapped there. Goering does his best to fulfill his promise. The Luftwaffe destroyed Dunkirk itself. The beleaguered troops have nowhere to go but the beaches. They scrabble over the sands, wade into the sea, and pray for rescue. With the Allies now exposed on the open dunes, Goering orders his Luftwaffe to wipe out their defenseless enemy. Almost 500,000 Allied troops are trapped on the docks and beaches of Dunkirk. Many thousands plunge into the water, hauling themselves towards the rescue boats. The struggling men in stationary vessels are easy targets for the predatory Heinkel 111s and Stuka dive bombers as they lay waste to the area. Running protection for the bombers are Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighter planes. One of the pilots is Adolf Galland. After a near-fatal training crash, Galland badly damages one eye, only passing sight tests by memorizing the charts. Despite his compromised vision, Galland downs 3 Allied planes in his first combat flight. He'll add 100 more kills by the end of the war, elevating him to Fliegerass, aka Fighter Ace. Protected by flyers like Galland, Luftwaffe bombers strike Dunkirk again and again, their barrage bringing them to the brink of wiping out the retreating Allies.
The din was infernal. To the scream of falling bombs was added the angry Hornets' noise of dive bombers, machine gun fire, the snarl of falling planes.
To try and shield the stranded troops, the RAF deploys its latest fighter plane, the Supermarine Spitfire. Some are fitted with cameras that activate when the guns fire. They capture the Spitfire at its deadliest, shooting down a Stuka dive bomber. The RAF sends 16 fighter squadrons to attack the Luftwaffe over Dunkirk. Able to bank and roll faster than the ME-109s, the Spitfire edges it in dogfights. In a single day, they claim over 38 kills. As the air battles rage, a hastily assembled evacuation fleet with over 50 destroyers starts its unlikely rescue mission. Recently discovered footage, taken by Lieutenant Philip Hall, shows one of the destroyers, HMS Whitehall, plowing through heavy seas towards France. Then Dunkirk itself comes into view. Smoke clouds from bombed oil refineries billow 15,000 feet into the sky.
Everything had been devastated. There was smoke everywhere. And on the sea, it was horrible. Boats were sinking all around, some of which we could only see the mast. It was terrible. It was terrible.
Destroyed boats block the harbor. Big ships like the Whitehall can't get close to the beaches.
The Royal Navy had ships that required deep water in which to operate. What they didn't have were shallow draft vessels of an amphibious assault type that could land on beaches and extract troops from the beaches themselves.
The British Admiralty issues a call to arms for anyone who has a vessel seaworthy enough to cross the channel. Over 800 civilian vessels, including merchant ships, yachts, and fishing boats, respond. A flotilla known as the Little Ships sets off towards Dunkirk.
The civilian little ships were a taxi service, if you will, from the beaches back to the larger Royal Naval vessels.
On the first day, just 28,000 Allied troops get off the beaches. The exhausted men scramble from little ships to big ones, but their terror isn't over. The Luftwaffe targets the ships in the channel. The RAF and anti-aircraft weapons throw up a protective wall of gunfire, but cracks remain.
We were attacked relentlessly by Stukas. I remember seeing a paddle steamer, and I watched a Stuka dive bombing it. It looked like the bomb had gone down the funnel. The whole thing disintegrated. I think they lost 2,000 chaps.
Overloaded ships arrive in ports along the southeast coast of Britain. In Dover, troops from the British Expeditionary Force and French armies disembark and reunite with their units. Many are scarred, mentally and physically. The walking wounded are helped down the gangplank, while the worst of the injured are lifted off. For 8 days, the desperate Allied evacuation continues. The RAF fly wave after wave over Dunkirk, its aerial umbrella denying Goering's Luftwaffe its vow to annihilate the Allies. In Dunkirk, Major Wilhelm Emmerling reveals a scene of utter devastation. His footage shows once ornate villas reduced to burnt-out shells. The ruined church of Saint Eloi gutted by incendiary bombs. The town's rubble hiding many of the 1,000 civilians killed by the Luftwaffe's indiscriminate bombing. And wrecked hulls litter the beach, a silent reminder of the 240 Allied vessels lost in the evacuation.
Dunkirk was a graveyard. The whole scene was filled with a sense of finality and death. The curtain was ringing down on a great tragedy.
Over 16,000 French and British troops died during the evacuation. The dead buried by their comrades in arms. With the fleeing expeditionary force abandoning nearly all of its tanks, vehicles, and equipment. But thanks to the unremitting bravery of the crews of the Navy, the Little Ships, and the RAF, 340,000 Allied soldiers are rescued. Many more than the 40,000 that were expected to be saved. Despite the chastening defeat in France, British newsreels headline the evacuation as the Miracle of Dunkirk.
The evacuation from Dunkirk was superbly planned, brilliantly executed. We find that it's a great morale boost for all British people. But also, the evacuation allowed the Allies to take off the beaches of Dunkirk a very important, experienced cadre of troops that provided the basis for an expansion of the British Army. It gives them the wherewithal psychologically to continue the fight, even if that meant standing alone.
Churchill uses Dunkirk as a rallying cry for Britain to escalate its war efforts.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender.
For the Germans, the Battle of Dunkirk is a missed chance to take the Western forces out of the war. But the invasion of France still rages. Almost a month into its campaign, the German army is still on the move. Now, it launches the second phase of its conquest, the wholesale destruction of the French military and the capture of the nation's capital, Paris. This phase of the offensive begins with armored units heading into the north and west central regions of France. At the same time, a separate force attacks the Maginot Line to the east to stop French units there reinforcing the defense of Paris. It's now the heart of France that faces the Blitzkrieg. French fighters fiercely defend their homeland. In Amiens, they repeatedly drive the German Fourth Army back with concentrated machine gun and artillery fire. But soon, even the most dogged French units are overwhelmed by the German onslaught. French tanks are no match for German firepower. Their crews pay the ultimate price. Among the hardest hit divisions in the French army are Black African troops drawn mainly from France's colonies in West Africa. The aftermath of one bloody encounter is filmed by Wehrmacht cavalry captain Harold von Vietinghoff-Riesch.
Nazi racial stereotypes and propaganda had depicted African colonial soldiers as a wild, unhinged, savages almost. This served a couple of purposes. First, it reinforced the superiority of Aryans. Secondarily, it convinced the Wehrmacht that African colonial soldiers were to be treated without quarter and without mercy.
Vietinghoff's footage shows captured African troops forced to drag corpses from burning buildings and dig mass graves for their fallen comrades.
We see massacres propagated against African colonial soldiers. When African soldiers surrender, they're put in camps, and their conditions are generally worse than with white French POWs. And part of this, again, comes down to the idea that Africans are subhuman, that they're less than the fully civilized and fully developed Aryan race.
General Edwin Rotker visits one such POW camp. As he did on his trip to Paris 3 years earlier, Rotker appears fascinated by black faces. He films as starving POWs fight over the raw entrails of a goat. A sobering insight into the suffering of the 120,000 French colonial troops captured by the Nazis. Many of the African soldiers are summarily killed by the Germans, while others are used as test subjects in degrading anthropological and medical experiments. The the Wehrmacht blazes a trail of destruction that leaves cities in ruins. And the French army decimated as it advances on Paris. Millions flee the city, shock written on their faces. A near-deserted Paris awaits the Nazis' arrival. U.S. Ambassador William Bullitt Jr. is the only diplomat of a major nation left in Paris. Fluent in French and German, Bullitt is appointed the city's mayor by Prime Minister Reynaud. After stepping in to convince the Nazis not to bomb the city, Bullitt negotiates the safe surrender of Paris. Just 6 weeks after the start of its invasion of France, the German army enters the French capital unopposed. Standing on the same street where he'd vacationed with his son 3 summers earlier, Edwin Rotker films a German Guard division as it parades from the Arc de Triomphe, then along the Champs-Élysées, the avenue of fallen heroes. Hitler demands that victory becomes a huge propaganda event.
Hitler sought to obliterate the memory of the defeat of Germany in 1918, one that was very painful for him and for the wider German nation. On entering Paris, the Germans wasted no time in branding it their own. Monuments, particularly those that were relevant to the French success in the First World War, were initially draped in the swastika flag and then eventually destroyed.
Prime Minister Reynaud is replaced by World War I veteran Field Marshal Philippe Pétain. With the Nazis now in control of much of France, Pétain negotiates an armistice with Hitler.
The Germans win the campaign quite rapidly and in style. And Hitler rubs France's nose in their defeat. He has the surrender ceremony take place in the same rail car where the Germans signed the armistice at 1918.
The railway carriage is transported from a museum to the exact location where 22 years earlier, the Germans surrendered to the French after the First World War. Film crews capture a gloating Hitler, strutting as he arrives to sign the armistice papers. The newsreels highlight every detail of the humiliated French and their moment of defeat. A week later, Hitler orders the railway carriage destroyed. The Blitzkrieg campaign may have been von Manstein's brainchild, but Hitler takes the credit and the glory.
In the aftermath of the Battle of France, Hitler had a new sense of self-confidence. He began to view himself as a military genius. Hitler believed that he was the only one going forward who would be able to drive the German military machine. He begins to view the war as a contest between him and the rest of the world.
Once again, Hitler celebrates with a victory lap, this time before adoring crowds in Berlin. Emboldened by his success in France, Hitler accelerates his campaign to stamp Nazi authority across the globe.